Good afternoon. My name is Chaz Henry, and I am the CEO of PowerChalk.com. I'm joined today by Jake Epstein, the lead instructor of Epstein Hitting. Jake, are you with us?
I am. Thank you.
Hey, good to have you. Coaches, Jake's dad, Mike, is widely known as the father of rotational hitting. Mike played for, he traded hitting theory with, and was highly endorsed by the great Ted Williams. Mike coached after he played, and on that path he developed what's now called the Epstein hitting system. Jake put that system to a test when he played in the Anaheim Angels organization. Jake, you hit 336 your last year, then you walked away and went into sales and marketing. I mean, who does that?
Somebody who doesn't run and field very well, I guess. I had a lot of friends that played a lot of years in the minor leagues, you know, and all of a sudden hit 30 and had to go back to school. So I was pretty close to my graduation, and I wasn't a very high draft pick. I knew I could hit, but other guys physically did things much better than me. So I figure, you know, it might be time to shut it down.
Well, I think their loss was our gain. Coaches, you see on the screen here a couple URLs to the MikeEpsteinHitting.com. And that's where you'll find Mike. You'll also note that this session will be recorded and posted at youtube.com/PowerChalk. So from there, you can trade this. You can send that link around to some coaches who couldn't be on with us live. For us, Jake, let's talk hitting. So I'm going to switch over to my Telestrator app, and we're going to load a kid, Brandon Diaz, from the National High School Invitational that's played here in Cary, North Carolina. And this is a swing. You and I looked at it, and I guess I pull it up just as a backdrop because really what I want to talk about, I want to dispel some of the myth and rumor out there. I know a lot of coaches have latched on to the rotational hitting concept. You know, they may have read or seen a couple videos, and now they're out teaching that or using that as their philosophy. But I think I'd like to kind of ask you, what is it? What are the fundamentals? What are the tenets of it? And how do we look for and find it in the swing?
Well, you know, the great part about rotational hitting is that it encapsulates, you know, everything that's been taught over the years, you know, dating back, and we saw that Babe Ruth clip up there. But linear hitting was something that came out, and when Charlie Lau wrote his book, The Art of Hitting 300, and essentially it was a continual weight shift from the back leg to the front leg throughout the swing. So you finished with, you know, probably 80 to 85% of the weight on the front leg. So in terms of what we teach what you see on TV. You know, what Pujols is doing, he may have a different style than, say, Hunter Pence, but they get to certain positions. And what the Epstein teaching system does is we have isolation drills to help fix the problems that players have. And not every player needs to start from scratch. So I know we're going to go through some different points here, but think of the Epstein teaching system not as a new technique or a different technique or a technique at all. It's how to apply information to a young player, maybe age 7 to 18 or 20 years old, so that they can understand and fix the problems that they have.
Well, you know, you said something interesting when we spoke earlier. You talked about the fundamentals that Ted Williams, you can't say invented because, you know, Einstein didn't invent E equals MC squared. He discovered it. You know, it's something that existed. You know, the techniques, the commonalities that exist in MLB players. You know, you talked about Ted Williams being the first to sort of introduce or discover those, and one was the hips lead the hands.
He did, and this is something that Williams was able to see with the naked eye. It wasn't something that's why it was so groundbreaking at the time, is he saw this all without video, and he said major leaguers have different stances, they have different rhythms, they have different hitches. But these are the three things that I see that they do the same, and one is their hips lead the hands. 2 is they maximize their swing plane, or they keep their barrel in a collision course with the ball for as long as possible. And the third one is that they properly stay inside the ball. And he said, those are the only 3 things that I can really see that they do the same. Sometimes they have different follow-throughs. Sometimes they have different whiffs with their stance. But those 3 commonalities do exist, and that's something that my dad, you know, really used as a foundation when coming up with our drills and our teaching system.
So what's interesting for me, coaches, is that these fundamentals, you know, and this is, we see this all the time on PowerChalk. It's not just what you can see, and you know, we've got a lot of coaches who use PowerChalk. They use it, you know, in the in a back room, and then they go out onto the field and they try to tell kids what they've seen. And it's not just what you can see, but what you can communicate. So part of the Epstein hitting system, if I get this right, Jake, is you've developed a methodology for moving a kid, from a swing to the pro swing. And it's really about teaching mechanics of that.
And it's about the steps, and it's about challenging that player enough in the first step of the process where he's going to struggle a little bit, and then he's going to get to mastery, and then all of a sudden you build in a little bit more, and you give him a little bit more, and he's going to struggle to that, and then he's going to master it. It's not just throwing stuff against the wall and hoping it sticks. The key to our teaching system, and I know a lot of you listening are my instructors and people that have our products, but it's taking one step at a time, and you can't move to the next level of the training until that first foundation, until the footing, if you will, of that player's swing is complete and it's structurally sound.
So let's take Brandon here, and let's kind of move him through the phases. And with him as an example, why don't you talk about if you see things that are not what you'd consider rotational, or if you think he's very rotational? Because I think a lot of coaches struggle with, where is my kid, in the rotational template? Where does he stack up?
And the thing that I mentioned to you earlier when we spoke is everybody has a different style and a different stance. And this player, has his hands kind of a little bit lower and a little bit further back than, say, Pablo Sandoval, who we'll look at later. I don't care what a player does from their stance until they drop the front heel, which is where we're going here. Once the front heel, right, and we noticed this player had a weight shift. Babe Ruth had a giant weight shift. Albert Pujols has a smaller weight shift. Hunter Pence has a big one. So it doesn't matter. The key is when you get to this heel plant position, and this is the checkpoint, and this is really where our teaching system begins, from heel plant to about the power V position or right after contact. This player has to match up with Ted Williams, with Mickey Mantle, with Albert Pujols, with Pablo Sandoval. It doesn't matter. The style, if he does a somersault from the on-deck circle and lands in this heel position on time, then I'm not going to change it, okay? So the key is this position.
So let's go from here. What do we look at from here to see if he's compliant?
The first thing we're going to look at is that his hands are going to be somewhere between the top of the armpit and the top of the shoulder. Number two, we want to make sure the upper body is still closed, and this is the biggest issue we have with players that are non-professionals. I even have this with college players that I work with. So the key here is that the hips start to open at heel plant. This is your hips leave your hands. This is your torque position. This is where power is created. Okay, power is going to be created whether it's golf, whether it's a hockey player hitting a slap shot, whether it's a baseball or softball player. This is that universal torque position. And what we're going to draw some lines here, and we're going to point where his belly button or where his belt buckle is facing. And then we're going to draw a line, and I do this with all the players that I work with. We're going to draw a line at where his sternum or where his chest is facing. And the separation of these two angles or these two lines is going to be your torque angle. And the cool part about PowerChalk is we can obviously draw all these lines. You used to have to use like a three-dimensional sensor-based program to get this, but we can do it really easily with the PowerChalk here. And you can see this player's at 21 degrees. Most players in pro baseball that hit for power, doubles, have a high slugging percentage are going to be somewhere between 30 and 40 degrees. We will see some of that with other players as well. The second thing we want to look at is notice how that back knee is pinched in a little bit at heel plant. So the front shoulder's down. When that back knee pinches in, the weight goes to the inside of the back foot, and that's what starts the hips. Okay, so one of the problems I shouldn't say young players, but volunteer coaches, and God bless you for being out there and coaching those poor 6- and 7-year-old kids with bad attention spans, is their back foot doesn't work properly. They're taught to push their hips open, and when you're taught to push them open, what happens is tension is created in the back leg, and they actually squish the bug, which in theory was a good idea. It was Dusty Baker's phrase. But notice this player's back foot's going to move forward, okay? So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll draw, or when I'm teaching a player, I'll actually put a brick behind their back foot so that they move away from it. The weight goes to the inside of the back foot and allows the knees to come together. So as this player rotates through, one of the other big issues we're going to have with players is something called bat drag. And if we go back, Chaz, if you can go back a few steps, bad drag right about there. This is called what we call the approach position. Bad drag would be his back elbow being in front of the knob of the bat there. And I see this with probably 90% of players that are under the age of 16. Okay, so we have to be very careful with that. And what happens is, instead of their shoulders rotating, what happens is their back elbow and their hands are starting to fire too soon. Okay, so that's another checkpoint we're going to look at. Now, as far as maximizing energy, what we're trying to do is
Brandon's in good shape here, correct?
Brandon is in good shape there. He could be in better shape, and we're going to see that with the big leaguers here in a second, where we're going to get that knob of the bat out in front. Okay, we can notice, you can see there's a little bit of distance. If you take that back a couple frames, maybe one more, right about there, not one more forward. So that's pretty good. You can see how next to his deltoid, next to the side of his shoulder, is kind of the top of his grip. So what I would like to see is the middle of the bat to be next to his shoulder. So if he could pull with his left arm a little bit more, what that's going to do is that's going to shorten his swing arc. Okay, so that's something, and we spend a lot of time on. And one of the things we do is, and I know a lot of you know, so we put the bat against the player's shoulder, and that's nothing more than a teaching drill to force them to have a short to-it kind of swing where they're not casting their hands out. So there's your power V position. Can we go back to contact real quick, Chaz? And something that's very, very important is I want you, actually, let's go before contact. Okay, one of the lines I draw, and I apologize for not going into this, but if you could draw a line behind his hamstring, his right hamstring, just kind of right along, you know, parallel, I guess, to his hamstring there. What I look for is if you hit the arrow and go forward 2 frames, I want to make sure that his back leg is going forward all the way into his power V position right about there. Notice how then the leg right there starts to go backwards. A lot of players' back leg goes backwards right at contact, and that means that they're usually squishing the bug. So as soon as weight is felt on the back leg, watch his back shoe, just go forward right past contact. So he's going forward there, and then right here he's going to decelerate. Watch the weight hit the back leg right there. And when the weight hits the back leg, you can see how, when the weight hits the back foot, his back leg actually goes backwards, and that's what will cause players to roll their wrist. Now, this player obviously isn't doing that, but one of the biggest issues that we have, and all my instructors out there, is, you know, we're working with, you know, 8 to 14-year-olds most of the time, and those are the issues you're going to see with them. So these are great examples, and all the pro players we're going to look at, this kid here's got a fabulous swing. You want to compare your kids to those players, and where those issues come in, that's where the Epstein teaching system comes in, to kind of patch those holes that may be visible.
Well, and I would look at that swing, and I would say that's a beautiful swing. And again, without something to model it against, you know, and I think that's where a lot of the coaches get stuck, is they get a kid who's got a pretty good-looking swing, and you're starting to make really fine adjustments there. And, you know, honestly, like me, I've been a 12-year Little League baseball coach. You know, I'm scared to make adjustments that I believe might, you know, actually do harm. So
yeah, that's great that you're conscious of that, because a lot of people aren't, and they just, hey, I heard, you know, my junior college coach said to do that, so it must apply to everybody. And one of the things that I cover when I certify instructors, and we have our big lectures, which are really long, you know, it's like 18 hours worth of information, is let's isolate the problem. If a player doesn't have a problem with his back foot, let's not even address it. If his stride is good, let's not change it. If his hand placement is, let's not change it. If he casts, okay, we got to find a drill to fix that one problem, but let's not mess up anything else in the process.
Well, and you know, what happens here, and you showed me this clip earlier, and I honestly had never really noticed, you know, the particular proximity here. We'll get these two guys, obviously Sandoval on the left and Josh Hamilton on the right, you know, into a similar position. Now, I've got them locked together, and they obviously, you can see here they recorded at different frame rates, and they have a little different pace to their swing. So I'm going to break the lock here, and I'm going to bring Hamilton to that position you talked about, and then I'll bring Pablo to a similar position here. And again, this is something I had not noticed, just how close the bat is to that shoulder.
And if you look at these players, they're completely different. And we can pull this back a little bit, not now, but Josh Hamilton, he's got so much going on with a hitch, and I love, everybody says, oh, you can't hit like that, you got a hitch. If you were to really break down big leaguers, so many of them have a hitch down to their hip. But the key is that they bring it back up to that armpit shoulder position that we talked about with the last one. But this is what we were talking about with the last player, where the bat comes down next to the shoulder. If you remember, that player's grip was next to his deltoid here. Notice notice how even Josh Hamilton, this clip is the best that I've ever seen for being short to the ball. In fact, if you stop him in that approach position, which is about maybe 2 frames further on the right, I would say, where that bat is about level to the ground. No, keep going further. Where he's pointing the knob at the pitcher. Okay, so if we go back 1, if we were to draw a vertical line, notice how the back of his swing arc, the end of his barrel, is way inside of his back foot. Now, with that player we just looked at, his barrel was actually behind his back foot. So
well, the other gauge you're using is the elbow. And I see this with my kids. A lot of them, the back elbow will be leading the bat. I mean, Josh Hamilton couldn't get his elbow further back behind that knob.
And that's good. Let's go back, if you don't mind, to when he's launching it, to his heel plant position. And again, that's really where the swing and the technique starts. So this is where you want to look at it with your young players. Once he gets the heel plant right here, watch how the knob of the bat stays in front of his back elbow. Yes, his back elbow drops and it slots correctly, but it's moving at the same pace as his hands. And what that means is his shoulders are turning his hands in front of his body. And then the arms kick in a little bit later. Okay, so if you look at the angle, if you see the distance between his forearms when he launches the swing, and we'll be able to see that actually with the panda on the left, the angle between his forearms does not change when he begins to rotate his shoulders. Okay, what you'll see with kids is their forearms and their elbows are actually going to get closer together in that position, and that's what causes the barrel to drop and then consequently the wrist to roll at the end. So if we go with Sandoval there and his first move after heel plant, I want you just to notice the distance between his elbows and his forearms. Now his elbow's really up high there, completely different than where Josh Hamilton was, right?
Right.
And that's all. And he had a big leg kick even before that, but now he's going to drop, and you're really going to be able to, and you may want to show him the torque position here, Chaz. We talked about that one player being at, go a little bit further maybe. That's actually pretty good. You'll see the difference because his front shoulder is so good. And when your front shoulder stays down, your chest is going to stay back. So there's your launch position again that we had with that younger player, and his shoulders were about level. You have to make sure that that front shoulder is just not up at the heel plant position. Okay, it's very, very important that that front shoulder is down when the heel plants and the hips are initiated. So there's your torque, there's your hips, leads your hands kind of move. But again, if you look at that distance, once he drops his elbow into more of a comfortable position, right, a couple more frames, right about there, now you look at that distance between his forearms, about 90-degree angle between his forearms. He's just turning that. He's not manipulating anything with his hands until he really turns the corner with his shoulders. And again, the back comes right down next to the shoulder, just like Hamilton's. And really that's, and I was talking to Chaz earlier, and the key is if you're going to have a problem with your player, it's going to be somewhere between heel plant, when the front heel plants, and the approach position. And again, that approach position is over there on the right-hand side of your screen with Hamilton. Okay, somewhere between heel plant and when that knob starts to face the pitcher, that's where most problems are going to exist.
Well, you really can't get more direct to the ball than that right there, can you?
You can't. The knob's coming out. Notice this, and this brings up another topic. We talk about swinging down and swinging up and all this jazz. The key is, when does he flatten out? When does he get on plane of the pitch? And what we're going to see with Sandoval is he's going to get on plane late. If he tries to hit it there, he's going to hit the top of it, but he hits it right at his front heel, and then he extends through it. So his contact zone, you can see, is probably up about 8 to 9 degrees from his front heel or his front foot to about, I don't know, a foot in front of his actual front toes. So he gets on plane right there. and then he stays through it. Now, if he were to try to make contact deeper in the zone, he would either swing under the ball or he would top it. Okay, so everybody's a little bit different. The key is when he does get into his zone, is he swinging up at, and a 90-mile-an-hour drop's about 10 degrees, is he swinging up somewhere between, maybe 4 degrees up and 10 degrees up? If he's swinging up more than that, he's going to probably create a lot of topspin. If he's swinging flatter than that or down or 0 degrees or a negative degree, he's going to end up popping those balls up. Okay, so the more you swing down through that happy zone out by his front foot, the more you'll actually pop up. And the more you swing up out in that happy zone, the more you'll usually hit the top of the ball and hit topspin balls to the pull side.
Well, and it's funny, you've talked about, you've worked with a lot of these guys, what their perceptions are on whether or not they're swinging up or down versus what the video shows you. And that's really,
exactly.
That's really what got me to this place is, I told you, seeing my golf swing, and the mismatch between what I thought I was doing and what I was doing. So it was really, through video that I was able to take the medicine that I needed to take. Once I realized what the disease was.
And it's very true, and without video, you don't know. And so what happens is, and like I said, it's tough because I have young kids, but a young kid like Josh Hamilton's not going to be able to chop down. He's not going to be able to swing down at a negative 20-degree angle, okay? It's not possible for him to do that, okay? Where
Right.
if you tell, hey, Josh Hamilton, maybe he was quoted once as saying, I try to stay on top. Albert Pujols does all the time, I try to swing down. There was a great Bobby Valentine video on that where he was breaking it down on ESPN, and he was saying, well, look, he's actually swinging up, but he thinks he's chopping straight down. Well, that's great. I don't care if what the player thinks about it. It's what they actually do. But an 8-year-old kid, if you tell them to swing down, they're going to chop all the way down. If you tell an 8-year-old kid to swing up, they're going to swing up too much. So everything has to be videoed so that the player understands exactly what they're feeling and what they're doing, which is,
I think some of that comes from the hands. If you think about what Josh might feel right here when he's taking his hands that directly, to the baseball, then that might feel like a chop to him. But if you watch the bat,
absolutely.
If you watch the bat gets level and stays level. So,
right.
So I think maybe that's the difference in the reel and the field there.
And a lot of it has to do with those frames that you're going through right there. If he uses his arms in that part of the swing, and we haven't really talked about sequencing, and a lot of my teaching technique goes on sequencing. The energy starts with the feet at heel plant. It works up through the knees, through the hips, through the abs and obliques, through the back and shoulders, through the arms, to the hands, to the bat head. If that chain is broken, then the energy never gets to the bat head. It's kinetic energy and the kinetic link. So what happens is when he goes to rotate, when Josh Hamilton goes to drop his heel, and he starts his hands, or he starts to cast or unhinge, if you will, what happens is that energy never works its way through the body. So that's why that first move, when it looks like his hands are going down, if you look at the relationship of his hands to his heart, if you will, his left chest, or the A in Texas, watch how the distance is the same. He's really turning his armpit here, and his hands are along for the ride. Right. Once his shoulders stop rotating right about here, or they start to slow down, then the energy hits the arms and hands, and now he's going to start to extend. So what happens is when kids are taught to throw their hands or use their hands, they do it at the wrong part of the swing. I tell players to throw their hands all the time, but they don't throw them until go about 2 more frames with Hamilton, till that knob's at the pitcher, and then right here they can throw as much as they want, and what will happen is they'll just stay on plane longer.
Hey, let me switch back to Brandon here, because I want to point out one thing, and this is really kind of the fundamental tenet of rotational hitting. So one of the things that was said in a past webinar that you corrected was rotational does not imply nonlinear. So let's take
correct.
Again, let's take Brandon here, and let's talk about his head position at start. He is linear, but
absolutely,
if we draw that again, now that his heel plant, so that's really the starting, the firing gun
correct.
for you is that heel plant. So if we look at what happens after heel plant. So he becomes very rotational around this line, that is No, I don't know. I don't know if that's the way you draw the line, or if you draw it up from the.
I usually draw it up from the back knee, but it's like anything else. If something is going to build rotational velocity, it has to have a stationary axis.
Gotcha.
Okay. Now, think of tetherball. If that tetherball pole was moving back and forth, on rollers, then the ball wouldn't go around the pole very fast. So with this player, you can have the biggest weight shift in the world, and that's, I don't care. Babe Ruth had a giant weight shift. But the key is once that heel plants, about a frame after heel plant, what I want to have happen is I want that head to stay still or slightly go backwards, okay? And then the back foot, the key to this is the back foot has to slide forward at least an inch, okay? So if he tries to keep his head back, but his back foot actually spins backwards, like he's squishing the bug, none of this works, okay? The hips don't work. So the key is head back as he's bringing that back foot forward.
So he looks pretty good there.
He looks outstanding there.
All right, couple minutes left. Left. I'm going to take you to one of my favorite subjects, which is Babe Ruth. He's been talked about, and let's talk about Babe Ruth in terms of linear versus rotational, because I've heard it said.
How about the size of his bat? How about we talk about that? Look at that thing.
And you know what? I've actually held one of his bats at the Louisville Slugger Museum in Louisville, Kentucky. And if you ever get a chance to do that, it's worth the price of admission just to hold that that tree. So let's go through with the Babe now.
We can do that topic at a later time. We'll do bat size topic. The difference between 1940 and now.
Now this is not great footage, and you see that the frames per second doesn't even register on here. So I think it jumps, and it's not completely consistent. But tell me what you see here in terms of holding
can we
him
go
up
back to
the rotational template.
Can we go back to the start? So I want you to watch his style, right? Look how close his feet are together, and watch his hands. Watch how he hitches all the way down. He's trying to get his hands going. Old-timers were notorious for this because their bats were all 35 to 40 ounces. But the key is if we take him, there's a huge weight shift, a huge linear shift, a big risk with a great reward. This is actually a drill I do with my players where we start with our feet together. So if you go one more frame, I'm thinking that's where his back knee is going to come in, right about there. This is his, it's probably between those two frames is his torque position. I would say we didn't quite get it. But notice where his hands are launching from. So even though his hands went all the way down to his hip, by the time he drops his heel, it's up at the top of his armpit.
Right.
And then you'll see his weight shift, probably one more frame maybe. And then his head, usually when a guy has that big of a stride, the head might go forward a little bit more, and then it'll start to become stationary. Well, it stays right there, I guess.
And then we've also got the camera movement.
We do, yeah.
Camera movement there. You can see the crowd jump a little bit.
Right.
But,
so you can see, and watch his knees come together here. So that when the head stabilizes and then the knees start to come together, that is a very powerful move. By the way, since we're looking at this, sorry to change stuff, look at the angle of that ball.
Well, there's no doubt that is super rotational as well.
Oh no, absolutely. So think of it as, and what I tell players, it's like the Volvo crash test. You have a car, and a car is going to run into a brick wall, and that car is going 50, miles an hour, and when it hits that wall, the back end kind of flies up a little bit. Okay, that's what that back foot. That's why you see a lot of guys where their back foot comes up and off the ground because they have a big weight shift going forward, and then that front leg acts as a wall to stop that, so everything kind of rotates around it. But the reason I wanted to call attention to that launch angle, now this was a home run. Do I want players to hit balls on that kind of a launch angle? Did he swing up at, what is that, like maybe 60 degrees, that launch angle with that ball? He absolutely did not, okay? But what happens is kids get yelled at for hitting the top of the cage. And a lot of times, like I have a giant cage here in Denver, that's like 18 feet tall. But most cages are 10 feet tall, and they hit the top and they get yelled at. And a lot of times if you hit the back of the cage, that's a ground ball, which I'm not saying ground balls are bad. That's great if you can hit the back of the cage. But what I love to do is I love to put a number on that trajectory. Because I have kids and they hit the top and they get so upset. So what I do is I put a number on it, and all of a sudden that trajectory was like 20 degrees. And what I tell them is most home runs leave at 30 to 35 degrees off the bat. So we're so far under that. That's a nice line drive to the gap. So use video, and I'm glad we did this tutorial because it's about comparing and looking at what the big leaguers do. But use the video to show kids what a good launch angle is off the bat, so they don't get frustrated in the cage setting.
Coaches, we're up against our 30-minute time here. Jake, we could spend hours and hours doing this, and there's obviously much more to the teaching system, not just the hitting system that you've got. I highly encourage the coaches out there to go to Jake's PowerChalk Pro page and get a lesson. Get a lesson for your son, get a lesson for one of your players. Start to engage with Jake, and from there you might want to consider getting your own Epstein certification. Epstein instructors on PowerChalk have their own library. They have model videos not available to the rest of the members, and the Epstein organization brings an incredible wealth of backup and support to your role as a coach. Jake, if you've got 10 more minutes, what I'm going to do is bring the recorded session to an end here, and let's take some questions offline.
That sounds great. I certainly have time.